Good morning. Last week was an interesting week, wasn't it? Well, we didn't exactly get what we were hoping for, but at least we have a fairly concrete plan of how we're going to open up over the next few months. I know that right now, kind of everything feels hard. Every conversation I have with people centers around the same issues. We're all just trying to hang in there. We're all just trying to overcome this awful, lingering state of isolation. And if you've arrived at a place where you just don't feel like yourself anymore, I want you to know that you're not alone. And I want you to know that I get it. And if I can, I want to help you overcome. So today, I want to talk to you about how we convey love. Because Jesus said that the most important thing we could ever do is love the Lord our God with everything that we are and love other people as we serve the world around us. We are always to be fulfilling the Great Commission in the spirit of the Great Commandment, even when things are hard. This is who we are, together and individually. Every one of our ministries, every one of our events when we used to have them, even how we do our worship will reflect these three foundations: loving God, loving people, serving the world. We are all going to encourage one another to step up to the expectation of fulfilling all three every week in our private lives and in the church when we resume our services. We are all going to develop the habit of seeking out opportunities for loving God, loving people, and serving the world. Love is a big thing, and it should never be confused with romance. Romance is, romance. Love is much bigger. See, love has strength and power. Love insists upon courage and hope. Love requires commitment and relentless passion. You have to learn to be brave in love because you will have to fight for it at some point in your life. Love rebuilds what has been broken. Love moves things that seem immovable. Love penetrates, love activates, love motivates, love persists. Love is a deliverer and a conqueror. It's a protector and a unifier. Love has a strength like no other, and it's who we're called to be. So if nothing else, we need to know what love is and how to live it. Now, normally, any time that love is preached about, we get an earful of the 1 Corinthians 13 passage that we've all heard dozens of times, I'm sure. I've preached on it so many times I can't even remember now. I mean, we hear it again and again about the patience and kindness of love. We hear about how it doesn't boast and how it isn't proud or self-seeking or easily angered, etc., etc. And that's good. We should know those things. But here's the thing. In his letter to the Roman church, Paul talks about love a little differently. In Romans, he digs a little deeper into the practical nature of love. He speaks more deliberately about how we do this thing called love. And he begins by saying that love must be sincere. Your love must be sincere when you're loving God. It must be sincere when you're loving people. And it must be sincere when you're serving, as we should. Now that means that whatever the measure of your capacity for love, whatever you may have to give, it's got to be real. I mean, it has to be authentic. It's not something that can be faked. It must be the genuine article, because now, more than ever, people are in need of the real thing. They are bombarded all the time with false notions about love. They're lied to repeatedly about what it is, how you give it, and how you're supposed to receive it. And because of that, they're hurt and they're scared and they're skeptical of anyone or anything referencing love. They need the real thing because it's the only thing with the power to break through. Only sincere love has the power to repair the damage that's been done. Now, please understand that doesn't mean that you have to enjoy all the same things that everyone else enjoys. It doesn't mean that you have to like the things that other people are into. That's not love. That's conformity. Even Tracy and I, who are extremely close, don't like all the same things. Not liking the same stuff has nothing to do with love. That has to do with personal preference. And I promise you, there isn't a single person anywhere on this planet who likes every single thing that you do. We are all different and unique. We're unique in our tastes and our desires, in our thoughts, in our actions. Love understands that and chooses to approach each and every individual with the same compassion and understanding because that's what love does. Just in the last little while, I had a major blast from the past, and that an old friend of mine from way back called me up and kind of out of the blue wanted to talk. At that point, I hadn't really seen him or heard from him in probably 20 years or so, and the last time I saw him, it was only really briefly. The last time we were really together was right about the time I was living in the streets, where for the better part of one summer, a bunch of us lived in the same rented house. So when he had called, it had been such a long time since we'd seen each other that, he was still referring to me by the name I was known in the streets as a teenager. Anyway, this friend of mine isn't where I am today. In many ways, he's still living like we used to when we were teenagers. His lifestyle, his habits, even his language is pretty much just as it was all those years ago. He called me to connect, and I could hear pain in his voice. You know what I mean? It wasn't anything specific. I could just tell that he was hurting on the inside. Our conversation was a little strange, but it was really good. He swore a lot and kept apologizing for it over and over and over again. And I had to stop him and tell him that although I appreciated the effort not to swear, I wasn't going to get upset with him for doing it. It was a little thing for me to spend even half an hour on the phone with this friend of mine, but it was a powerful moment for both of us, especially when I reminded him that I love him. You could hear the change in his voice. You could feel the change in his spirit. Love changed the moment for both of us. You see, I didn't need him to be where I'm at for me to love him. I love him because I love him, period. And change doesn't happen in a person so that they can be loved. Love happens to a person and then it changes them. That's what Paul was talking about in 1 Corinthians 9, verses 22, where he says, I have become all things to all people so that by all possible means I might save some. I do this for the sake of the gospel that I might share in its blessing. So love must be sincere. And if we are going to mature in loving sincerely, there are some areas that we need to place our focus. The first of these areas is our attitude. It's a hard thing to hear, isn't it? Love must be sincere in our attitude. Paul says we should hate what is evil, cling to what is good, be devoted to one another in brotherly love, honor one another above ourselves, never be lacking in zeal, but keep our spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Love must be sincere in our attitude. What is your love attitude? What are some of the things that you believe about love that have shaped how it's expressed by you? In your love, do you see past the things that you don't like or the things that you don't agree with in others? Is your reaction toward God and the people of this world filled with devotion, honor, zeal, joy, patience, and faith? Because these are some of the areas that Paul points out that we're to have sincerity of love in our attitude. I've heard it said many times in my life that attitude is everything. Have you ever heard that before? Do you believe it? I mean, your attitude determines how you're going to react to something. It's the way you think about something before you're even faced with it. Your attitude is what's going to be reflected in your behavior. So if you're not sincere about something in your attitude, your behavior is going to reflect that. I see this all the time with my kids. You see, although my kids are good kids, they're kids. And they will sometimes get on each other's nerves, more so now than ever before, it seems. And sometimes they'll even fight. Now, most of the time, Tracy and I let them sort out their own issues, unless it's starting to get out of hand. We always step in when it starts getting out of hand. I always feel like one of those, town sheriffs from the old westerns when that happens, stepping in to deal with them misbehaving cowboys again. I'll saunter into the room and start with a, hey, we can't have any of that around here. You two need to make up and shake hands. Or in the case of my kids, sometimes I'll make them hug each other. But it's at this point of the intervention when you really see the effect that attitude has on the situation. And anyone who's a parent will know right away what I'm talking about. Pretty much every time I intervene in one of their fights and I make them apologize to one another, the same thing happens. The one apologizing offers up an, I'm sorry, with not one shred of decency in the statement. Do you know what I'm talking about? I usually have to tell them to try again because that was not an apology. And if that's how they're apologizing, then they don't really mean it, right? Well, as adults, we're not a whole lot different. Our attitude determines how we respond in any given situation. And the one receiving our attitude is going to respond to that, no matter what our words or our actions are. Attitude is everything because attitude is where it begins. And attitude takes time to develop. And it also takes time to change a poor attitude into a good one. The good news is we've got lots of help. Even in this scripture alone, Paul presents some habits to put into place in order to have the right attitude. He says that we should hate what is evil and cling to what is good. And evil is the absence of God, and God is what's good. He's saying to keep ourselves from the things we encounter that are void of Him, and instead pour ourselves into the things of God. And if you're not sure what those things might be, just open your Bible and start reading. Look in the New Testament. And if that still isn't working for you, you have a whole church family here that can help you. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. I mean, this isn't just having agreement with each other. It's about devotion, being devoted to one another. Paul's talking about a hardcore, I got your back attitude here. Honor one another above yourselves. This is about keeping a perspective that says that it's more important to honor the people around you than it is to be honored yourself. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. This is where the encouragement is so critical and why it's so important to be plugged into a church family. We need each other, even if we're separated. Because if we're loving God, loving people, serving the world around us as we should, you can bet that the enemy is going to be all up on you. He doesn't want you to impart the power of God's kingdom in this community. He wants everyone to stay asleep, indulging themselves forever. We need to keep that fire of passion for God lit. And we help each other keep those fires lit with the encouragement of our testimony and fellowship, which is coming. It's like pouring jet fuel on a campfire. Lastly, Paul talks about being joyful in hope, patient in affliction, and faithful in prayer. Hope should excite us because we know that God will come through. Affliction shouldn't sway us because we know that God has a plan in every circumstance. And our faithfulness in prayer sets our hearts in the right place to grow in our relationship with Him and in the sincerity of our love attitude. Love must be sincere in our attitude. Love must also be sincere in our actions. Now, this one is kind of logical, right? Paul says, share with God's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. So, one of the points we must always keep in the forefront of our minds is that when we love God, or we're loving people, or we're serving the world for Him, it's active, right? We're not just talking about feelings here. We're not just going to sit around thinking nice things about God or nice things about our neighbor or hoping for the best in the world. Love is about something we're doing. And it's not just something we say to the people we care about. Saying it doesn't mean a thing without follow through. And our actions will always speak louder than our words. I mean, think about it. How many people did Jesus say, "I love you" to? And how many people knew that Jesus loved them? Now, why do you suppose that was? Now, people knew that He loved them because His love was sincere in His actions. He showed them. He demonstrated love constantly and consistently. We have a really cool blessing in our family in that our youngest, Rachel, has a love gift that we can all learn from. I remember years ago, we began noticing that whenever we had a new family over for dinner at our place and that family had young children, well, the kids were walking out the door with more than what they had arrived with. You see, Rachel began to give away her toys to the visiting kids. Now, I should point out that we're not talking about her dolly with the busted leg or the stuffy with the popped stitching. No, we're talking about her very best, and in many cases, her most favorite toys. She just wants others to be blessed so much that she's willing to part with the things she cares about most for little more than to see a smile on their faces when they leave. Now, at first, I thought this was just a kid thing. Kids like toys. She gives toys. Kids like her. But as time went on, it became very clear that Rachel has a gift for loving people. If there's someone hurting, she seems to be always the first one who will notice, and often the very first to respond. She loves to comfort people, make them feel better. She loves to bless others, and most of all, she loves to give. A few summers ago, we were blessed with tickets to go to Ripley's Aquarium in Toronto. It being Toronto, however, we had to park a million blocks away and walk to the aquarium. At one point in our walk, there was a homeless man sitting on a corner begging for money for food. And she asked me, "Daddy, why is that man sitting on the sidewalk over there?" I told her that the man didn't have a job and maybe didn't even have a home, and so he was asking people for money so that he could eat. She looked at him one more time and then turned back to me and said, "Can I give him some?" And what happened next was breathtaking to me. When she handed him the $5 that I gave her, he looked up and he saw my little girl standing there. And as he reached out for the bill saying thank you to her, he choked in his breath just a little bit, the way a person does when they're fighting back tears. This man that so many were overlooking that day recognized that he was being loved upon by someone, because the love was sincere in her actions. We can learn a lot from our kids. Our love needs to be sincere in action too. Paul gives us examples of the kinds of actions that speak to the sincerity of our love. He says we should share with God's people who are in need. Even when Rachel was just a little 7-year-old girl in the streets of Toronto, she knew how to do that. He says we need to practice hospitality. Now that's more than just being invitational towards people, but rather it's also concerned about their feeling welcome and having their needs met. He says we should bless those who persecute us, because love conquers all. We're to rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn, live in harmony with one another, and we're to be willing to associate with people of low position. Living our love sincerely in action is what will change the lives of the people in our community. So I want you to ask yourself, what can I do today to show the sincerity of love that I have? Better yet, ask Him. Ask the Lord what you can do to show sincere love in your actions. Love must be sincere in our attitude. Love must also be sincere in our actions. And finally, love must be sincere in our adversity. Now, Paul writes, "Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everybody. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, 'It is mine to avenge. I will repay,' says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." So love must be sincere in our adversity. But here's the thing. If your love isn't sincere in your attitude, or your love isn't sincere in your actions, you're going to have a rough time with this one. As it is with all things in the faith, there is a process for maturity. And if you don't have maturity in your faith, then you're going to have a real tough time with this one. I mean, think about it. Your attitude is what defines your responses to any given situation. And if your love is not sincere in your attitude, how do you think you're going to respond when someone does you evil? It's not going to be good, is it? But even if your attitude is sincere in love, but you don't have any sincerity of love in your actions, how will you act when someone does evil to you? Again, it may not be so good. This is why it's important to develop the right habits and cultivate the right heart in your life. The reality is, when your attitude and your actions are sincere in love, this one's actually pretty easy. When I was pastoring in Arnprior many years ago now, I had a situation one Christmas that really upset me. We had a light rain one day while I was out and about. And there was a really bad section of road that, although it was not very long, there was quite a little hill, and at the bottom of which there was an intersection. Though most of the roadways were pretty clear of ice, this one section was basically just a skating rink. And although I was going really, really slowly, once I was on that ice, there was nothing I could do. It was a hill, and my car slowly started to spin. It was so weird because it was so slow, yet there was nothing I could do about it. It just kept turning, almost in slow motion, like something you'd see in a really bad comedy film. Well, despite the fact that I was spinning, a woman came down the street behind me and in a single moment just kind of drove out onto the ice too. And now we were both slipping and sliding. And in this auto dance that we were both involuntarily a part of, my car scraped up against the back quarter panel of hers, and I heard a dull pop. My car had broken out a small section of the back strip that ran up the side of her car. Once we'd stopped, we exchanged information and we went our separate ways. A few days later, she called me and asked to see me, and when we met, she showed me an invoice from the body shop that showed a $700 total for the work that they'd have to do to repair her car. Reluctantly, I went to the bank and I got the money. I was reluctant because it was our Christmas budget. We were to buy a tree and decorations and all of the gifts with that money. And without it, we had nothing. Anyway, a few weeks went by, and one day I see her driving down the road, and the hole was still there. And I confess, I was pretty upset. I was flippin' angry. That was our Christmas money. We had little kids, and she took it and didn't use it for the repair. I went to her house to confront her, but before I went to the door, I stopped for a moment, praise Jesus, and I prayed a little prayer. And then I went and I rang the bell, and she answered. I asked her why she took my money and then didn't use it for the repair, and just as I was about to start in with, well, that's the same thing as stealing, something happened. You see, she began to tell me about all of her troubles, and they were many. The money I had given her enabled her to deal with some serious situations in her life. I felt a wave of the Spirit of God come over me, and the conversation changed. We talked for a while about her situation, and I offered her some comfort and encouragement in the end. And before I left, I prayed for her, and we parted ways with me offering a blessing on her and her family. In the end, a lot of good came out of that situation. Now, it's important to recognize that I didn't get my money back. I didn't even ask for it, in fact. And God didn't replace it either. I didn't, go home and find an anonymous envelope with $700 in it. But God did some really great stuff in that situation, and I was blessed greatly by it. My whole perspective changed that day, and in the end, God did provide for our Christmas traditions, gifts and all. He gave me the blessing also of this well-learned lesson of having sincere love in adversity. That moment not only blessed her, but it changed me incredibly much. I've not been the same since. The important thing to note here is that God has a plan for good in every single circumstance. If we repay evil with evil, we're making an agreement in our spirit with evil. That will never go well for us. But when we operate in peace, trusting God during difficult situations, our faith will grow and we're blessed in our actions. We overcome evil with good because that's who God is. And that's who we are meant to be. So as Paul says, do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful. That means pay attention to what's going on inside of you, not just what's going on around you. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everybody. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, because sometimes there may be nothing you can do about it, but as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge. I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. If we are going to love God, to love our neighbors, the people around us, and we're going to serve him in this world, then love must be sincere in our attitude. Love must be sincere in our actions, and love must be sincere in all of our adversity, even what we're going through now. May the Lord bless you richly as you set forth to love sincerely in all things. Blessings to all. See you next week.